If you're like me and getting up off of the couch sounds like either bathroom problems or bedroom ecstasy, this episode is for you because Heidi Hadley is a certified clinical somatic educator and somatic movement teacher, and she's going to tell us why our body feels like that and what to do about it. Hey, guess what? You can do less and still be on top of everything. The voice that says everything will just fall apart is total mind BS. Okay, so my first question is, what the heck is pandiculation?
So pandiculation is basically the movement practice that I teach in somatics. So for many, many years, people have been stretching and thinking stretching is the panacea for releasing muscle tension and all that sort of thing. But in front of our very eyes, our little furry friends, our pet animals, cats and dogs and other vertebrate animals have been pandiculating. And it's actually a sensory motor reset. So it's where the part of our brain, the sensory and motor parts that allow us to sense and feel and create movement, it's those areas that speak to all the different muscle groups and regions of our body. And so when we look at animals, they pandiculate, they don't stretch. So what they do is they contract the muscle. And when you contract the muscle, it lights up those corresponding areas of the muscle that you're contracting to those parts of your brain. And that kind of jump starts and lights up your brain. And then if you watch the animals, they slowly lengthen, their little bum sticks in the air, they've got their legs in front of them. They slowly lengthen the muscle to the end of its natural range of movement before it turns into a stretch, which is the really key component. That's where you've got to be mindful and notice it's before it turns into a stretch. And then they just relax. So they might settle down in their bed or they might walk off and integrate and go off in the garden. And that's basically what all the animal kingdom do. And we did that early on in our life. In the womb, we'd be kicking. That's the pandicular response. We did it naturally as babies. The only thing we do now that's a pandiculation is a yawn. But if you consider little babies, what do? They yawn and their little back will arch. It's like an instinctive little movement and then they settle down. But because of life, we, from the age of 5, we're told to sit still at school, stop wriggling, look straight ahead. We have a lot of stress in our body, which immobilizes and locks us down and creates like a level of body armoring. All that sort of thing happens. It's kind of like been deconditioned out of our system. So unless we know how to pandiculate, and that's why within Total Somatics, I'll bring that in, we kind of live, we just live in a very rigid body. We continue to hold all this suppressed emotion, trauma, stress. If we've got habits of leaning a certain way at a desk or carrying children for a long time on one side, they grow up and go to school. We have all these patterns of tension. And unless we wake up the sensory motor parts of our brain with pandiculation, we will continue to live with very tight, tense body. And that's why years later, people then wonder why they've got like one-sided pain, or they're wondering why they walk with a bit of a limp, or they've got, structural changes to their spine. And that's because if the muscles have stayed constantly contracted, because the brain hasn't been recalibrated with pandiculation, people start to get a lot of pain. And that's usually when I see people, is they've tried everything and they just don't seem to get anywhere. And things like massage is wonderful. It really is brilliant. And dry needling and manipulation, it's all great. However, we've got to get to the control center. And that's what pandiculation does. It gets to the sensory motor cortex, again, the part that senses and feels and creates movement. When we pandiculate, we light up that area and we literally teach the muscles effective muscle memory again. So when to contract and when to relax. Because a lot of people are just walking quite wooden, quite stiff. So because of that reason, pandiculation is really powerful. And can I just add something in here is that, if we look at the history of stretching over the time, that's changed a lot. So years ago, they used to say stretch before exercise. Now they just say movement, which is bringing movement. It's starting to wake up the sensory motor cortex, just kind of like a form of pandiculation, kind of, but it's movement. Whereas when you stretch a muscle, there's loads of research showing now that when you stretch a muscle, the sarcomeres, which is the motor unit, that's what gives you the power output. It reduces the power output of a muscle for up to 45 minutes after stretching. So you can see now that the more they look into movement science and neuromuscular science, they're starting to see that the stretching might feel nice initially, but it actually doesn't hit the brain. And all it's doing is like a temporary fix. So that's why pandiculation is a very effective, time-efficient way of releasing muscle tension, and going back to what we did instinctively. We started in the womb doing those movements.
Wow, that's really cool how the science is coming into it and evolving and making that mind-body connection. So what I'm hearing, if we were to break it down into 3 simple steps, it would be to tense the muscle. I don't want to use the word stretch, but elongate the muscle until you get to a stretch and then consciously relax. So if I was going to want to start this practice, what should I be doing in order to get started?
So to start, obviously, it would be great to be helped with somebody that can do this work, because obviously when you contract and it's lengthening that muscle to the end of its natural range, muscles will move in certain ways. And of course, somatics looks holistically, so they're looking at everything. So you don't treat like a tight hamstring on its own, you look at the pattern of tension it's created. So if you've got somebody that's actually directing you, they will teach you really specific ways that you can release these patterns of tension. The big thing I always say to everyone, though, is our stress response, the instinctive stress response that we have, going back to that fight or flight stress response, begins at the center of our body. So right down in that whole pelvic area. So what we want to be able to do is get under our conscious control, because most of the time we're living in subconscious, muscular, tense type patterns. What we've got to do is get the center, so all around our sort of pubic area, our belly, waist, hips, lower back. We need to get that back under our control. So there's some very basic movements, but wouldn't say basic, I say they're fundamental. They're like building blocks, because they come into other movements as well, of releasing the tension through the front, back, and the sides from the center. Because when we get stressed, our tailbone either tucks up and under, which is what we see with an anxious dog. When a dog gets anxious, their tail goes between their legs. Some people do that. Their tail goes between their legs, as it were, and they depress their rib cage and their chin juts forward. So you see that real rounded back, very tight through the front. Other people, when they get stressed, their belly will stick out. They get a huge sway back, lower back. Their bottom sticks out. Their shoulders are drawn right back and their chin draws in. So they look like a sergeant major. So it's either because they've gone into the fight or flee, or they've gone into that fawning or feigning death. So what we need to be able to do is identify which pattern of tension we have. And that's the fundamental thing. So it would be a very basic movement, but it's teaching your nervous system to come out of that fight or flight stress response. But there's things that a clinical somatic educator, and that's the key word, educator, will do. And that is they'll educate you and empower you into knowing what your nervous system has been doing. And that's what's very different. So we call ourselves educators instead of practitioners, because we're bringing back that control and that ownership to the individual, which is a really powerful thing on a psychological level. If someone's been through a lot, they may have been through the system as well and seen lots of practitioners, been given conflicting prognosis or diagnosis, and they feel like they've lost their identity. So if you see an educator, a clinical somatic educator, they will actually work with you, teach you these things on your brainstem reflexes, how to sense and feel where the end of that range of movement is, and also show you various pandiculations that are applicable.
You had mentioned earlier that one of your big focuses is building that lifestyle so that it's integrated in everything that we do, and building a daily practice. So what would that look like?
So with a daily practice, we'd look at from the moment you wake up, just noticing, because I bring in somatic movement, mindset, and mindfulness. And I was saying to you earlier, so I've got my t-shirt here just because it's so key, those 3 pillars of total somatics that I bring in. And this is because of the background in clinical somatics, but then trauma therapy and neurophysiology and stuff. So looking at weaving it together, because you can do all the movement, but if you're not looking at your mindset or how mindful you are in the day, the movements can become purely mechanical. And that's why it's really important to have that education behind you, so that the mindset and mindfulness comes up. So you could wake up in the morning, and already a lot of my clients will say they do this, is they'll just do one of those little mini recalibrations through their pelvis, their belly, their waist. So they'll lie in bed and just do a few minutes of that, few little deep breaths if they've got that opportunity. If they can't, they get in the shower and they do a standing version, or they're brushing their teeth doing a standing version. So what you're doing is already starting to reset your nervous system, soften through the center. And then it's just noticing your emotions throughout the day. So that's why again, you'll get in the car. If you're going in the car or in public transport, you're off to work, you'll be aware of your posture. So a lot of stuff that in Total Somatics I educate is about your posture and your postural awareness. So you'd be looking at maybe on the way into work, you can do like a seated scan, just a few seconds. You can just scan where's your weight through your bottom, where's your shoulders, all that sort of thing. You can do a little mini, like a recorrection, couple of little movements, little pandiculations, literally a couple. That's all you need. And then you might get to work, and throughout the day, just checking in on your posture, for instance. But throughout that as well, I encourage people to become mindful where they can on if they feel that there's a lot of pressure, you've got people throwing deadlines on you, what can you do throughout the day to bring your nervous system back into a regulated state? So I teach them little breathing techniques. I get them to say, if you can go into the toilet, shut the door where no one can get you. And I teach them some breathing techniques with eye movement, which is massively quick in getting them back into a regulated state. So it might sound a lot, but it's just little snippets. And if you do those little snippets, it keeps your nervous system regulated. If you're doing a regular somatic practice, a pandiculation practice anyway, which could be a 20-minute session, a few times a week, if you're doing those little bits in between, it's allowing your nervous system to stay in a much more regulated state rather than shooting up into that fight flight a few times throughout the day. And the reality is our nervous system fluctuates. It's fluctuating all the time. It's unnatural to say that we're going to stay in this little regulated state. Things happen and it's there for our survival. But I always say we want to create a flexible and resilient nervous system. So we're going to go up into those stress things. It could be that the car's screeching around the corner, we hear it, and our nervous system takes us out of that stress situation. But quite quickly, we regulate back down with the different principles and skills that I teach people. And so that's what you want to be able to have, is that flexibility and that resilience, because most people are just living in their stress response.
Can you think of, a specific example where somebody has come to you, they were in a terrible state, and they had this epic, amazing transformation?
Oh yeah, there's lots and lots and lots. I think one that I share a lot is a young lad. This is a few years ago now, so he's probably closer to 30, I think now. But he came to see me and he was like early 20s. And I actually have a picture, like it's in my free ebook, and I mention it a lot, and you can just find his before and after picture. So there's also a case studies page on totalsomatics.com. You can have a look. But he came in to see me and he was crying. He was in agony. He had and you'll see it on the picture before and after. You'll see really rounded back, tailbone tucked under. He was in agony for such a young lad. He'd been and had manipulation by a practitioner. And he said that for 2 hours afterwards, he was in the bath crying with painkillers. And he'd done everything. And this is the thing I see people that come in, they've done everything. And so he came in and he's then saying, I'm willing to try anything, willing to do this because I've tried everything. It's not working. So you already know when you've got somebody like that, they're going to be receptive to learning this and really wanting to take back ownership. So we went through 6 weeks together. And I taught him very specific movements. He started to understand his posture, his triggers, what takes him back into those postures. We talked about how efficient movement happens with the muscles, also how your brain is patterning that tension throughout the day. So all of this happened, and I'd see him every week for 6 weeks, and he's carried on, anyway now. But in that 6-week period, the pain reduced significantly. He was sleeping much better because, again, when you're in a stress response, the last thing your nervous system thinks it's safe to do is to actually sleep. So he had this insomnia. So the sleep improved massively. His gut health massively improved. And he just didn't have so much of that joint pain. And the one thing that really hit me for a young man in his 20s is that he said when he was at high school, he used to try and find ways of getting out of sport. So he'd been suffering with this for years. And so he would never do a lot of physical activity because he was in so much pain and he was just so rigid and awkward and it just, all sorts of things when you see his posture. And so basically, in the time that I'd seen him, he started taking up ice skating. And he said to me, I was thinking of what you said about the principle of movement and how your body's working. And I talk about counter rotation with the body and all that sort of thing for shock absorbency. And he said, And I was just picturing, and this is the true embodiment. He said, and when I was doing my ice skating, he said, I could just feel my body in that rhythm. And that for me was like, I've gone goosebumps now. It really was amazing, because that poor lad had been living in his head through trauma and stress and cognizing very cortical for years. And when I heard that, I knew he was truly embodied. And that's why he said to me, you've saved, it was really amazing. He goes, you've actually saved my life, which I haven't quite, but, but it made a big, big difference to him. And when you see the picture, there's a massive difference. He's got this lovely straight spine now. I have rolling pictures here because I'm in my studio in my wellbeing center. In my reception area, I have a TV screen and I have lots of inspirational quotes. But every now and again, his before and after picture shows up and everyone says, look at him. And I go, yeah, there's a big story behind him, and so he's one of many. There's loads with different reasons why they had it. But I'd say it was great because for somebody so young to be able to help him so early on, I know now he's got those skills. And that's the thing, he's got the skills. And there are times, he says to me, that he gets anxious again. He stops, he comes back to the fundamentals, and then he'll go from there again. So we're all recalibrating all the time. We do software resets on our phones and on our computers. We need to do a regular software reset on our brain to body connection, basically, because trauma and stress, injuries, habits, they will have a real impact on our central nervous system. So we need to keep this. So we're not all we don't, when it's not fixing straight away, we need to keep this up. That's why it is a lifestyle situation. Could be coasting off really nice, and then something could hit off. And that's what he does still now. He comes back into his body and is curious to notice how he's feeling each day, which is really important.
So if people are interested in trying this approach, you offer a free session. How does that work?
So if people go to totalsomatics.com/gift, that's a free 33-minute somatic movement session. So I'm here in the studio and I teach you how to release through your shoulders, through your hips, release across your chest, down the sides of your body, start getting some mobility back into your rib cage, because that's really important. A lot of people might just think it's all about neck and shoulders. And we can do some of the most incredible breathing techniques, but because of the subconscious stress response, it will create rigidity in the rib cage. So unless we release that rigidity, all the wonderful breathing techniques in the world will not be at their best until we get that release. And then the other resource that I've sent you is totalsomatics.com/regulate. And that's an audio about 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, and it's breathing and eye movement. So that was when I mentioned earlier about us coming back into more of a regulated state with our nervous system. That is something that I teach people a lot. When people come into the clinic and they're feeling quite anxious, I will go straight to teaching them that series that that people have got available, because that instinctively, when you bring the breathing and the eye movement, will take them out of that fight or flight, or the feigning death sort of response or freeze response, back into more of a regulated state. So they've got that available. And obviously, if they want to learn more, I've got an online membership at totalsomatics.com, which opens periodically. So a few times throughout the year, I open the membership doors for people to join.
Wonderful. That sounds amazing. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this amazing expertise that you have with all of us. And so before we sign off, is there any last words you have for our audience?
Probably if people want to know a little bit more and they want to, like, for podcasts and things like that, I've got a podcast which is called Somatic Movement and Mindset. But also I've transferred a lot of that onto my YouTube channel, which is Total Somatics. So on there, I break down little bite-sized pieces, understanding about total somatics and pandiculation, trauma, posture, all sorts of things to do with somatic movement, mindset, and mindfulness. And then every now and again, I bring on experts, and it could be experts that are talking about even things like menopause, because all of that has a huge impact on our nervous system. And what else? So there's lots of experts that have come in over the time. I had something only recently of the importance of self-care during challenging times. So if people want to kind of learn much more, again, they can find me at Somatic Movement and Mindset podcast, so all over the different podcast channels, or at Total Somatics YouTube channel.
So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And I can't wait to check out all of your freebies. See you soon. What if self-care wasn't a dirty word? Hit subscribe and we'll see if we can make that happen.